Welcome to Lecture 3. How will I know if I've found the right one? A lecture that helps you figure out how to find the perfect match typographically for every design project you're working on. On this first slide, you will notice I have chosen papyrus as a typeface in the beautiful color brown. You are invited at this point in the lecture to hit pause, open the slides, click on this text, and enjoy the link that takes you to an SNL skit that made every graphic designer feel seen and heard when it first aired. Go ahead, pause, watch that video. So here's some of the things that we are covering in Lecture 3, typeface selection. Typography is more than letter forms. It's a language made visible. In this lecture, we'll explore how type carries meaning beyond words and how its visual qualities, shape, weight, rhythm, and tone communicate emotion, identity, and intention. You'll learn to make deliberate typographic choices that align your message with form, ensuring that your design speaks as clearly as it reads. So, some of the concepts we're looking at here are function, category, classification, history, famous usage, your audience, semiotics, trends, legibility, scale, production methods, economics, that end user license agreement. Type styles like blackletter, Tuscan, and chop suey, they're controversial. And then we're going to close with looking at this lecture's master of type, monster of type, Ellen Lupton. So let's start here with a metaphor because I love metaphors. This is the second wine metaphor of this class. Um, so back to the wine metaphor. A sommelier or a wine steward is an expert who works in fine dining restaurants and specializes in wine service and pairing wine with food. They help customers choose wine. To do this job, they must know grape varieties, wine regions, tasting skills, food and wine pairing, the economics of wine, customer communication, trends, and wine history. And so for our illustration here, I am welcoming all of you to your new role as a sommelier of type. Yes, graphic designers are the sommelier of type. And so here you are as the designer with your Helvetica New, Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Condensed, Helvetica Book Italic, and on the back shelf we see Caslon and Times New Roman. It is your job to pair these typefaces with the messaging in every project. So here are the things that you need to know, just like a sommelier. These are what type sommeliers must know before choosing a typeface. They need to understand its function. What are you going to use it for? The category, right? Is it a serif, sans serif? Its classification. Is it a humanist sans serif? A grotesque sans serif? Its history. So thinking of things like the designer, the foundry, the release date, and famous usage. What was it used for that has since imbued this typeface with meaning? Who's the audience? What might they respond to? What does the typeface say when a person looks at it? So the semiotics. What are some trends that are happening at the time of creating this project? And then the economics. What does the end user license agreement say? The license that you are using this typeface for, is it commercial? Is it personal? Make sure you have the right license before you start using a typeface in paid work. So I have two images here. These are examples of type pairings for cartography. And so on the left, we see a serif typeface. This map feels a little bit older, a little bit less functional, a little bit more informational and historical, whereas the map on the right feels more technical and is more about navigation and function than historical understanding. Some really great type examples, examples of type pairings for cartography. These were produced by Hofler and Co. You can click on this link. It will take you to the Hofler Type Foundry. These are some of the fanciest typefaces in the world and most expensive. But the Whole Flare Type Foundry does a really good job of providing examples of type pairings. So, what two typefaces might go well together in a project? So, here are some selection factors. We need to think about scale and density. So, the first thing you need to determine in scale and density is the deliverable going to be large or small? Is this a brochure with a lot of type on it, or is this a billboard with just one line of text? Is it text heavy? Is it a single word? Is it a grouping? Your chosen typeface will affect legibility of your message and either hinder it or improve it. So, ornamental and display faces are designed for large scale text in small quantities. They should not be used for body copy. And as you work with type more, you'll begin to understand these differences better. So think of ornamental or display typefaces are fonts where every letter form looks really special. It has a lot of personality. The Harry Potter title, that is an ornamental typeface. That is not to be used for body copy. If a typeface is really condensed, right? So really skinny or it's heavy, really black, those are also not meant for body copy, right? So those are for larger like headlines, subheads, um, making word marks, not for body copy. Body copy is the text that you would read in a book, right? So long reading, body copy, we don't want fancy fonts. It's really hard on the eyes. So typefaces that include in their name words like Roman, book, or regular, those are designed for large amounts of text, textants. They typically include weights that are also suitable for display purposes. So you will find a Caslon typeface, Caslon book, or Caslon regular, Caslon Roman. That tells you that that weight of type is great for lots of text. Typesetting a novel, or the instructional text in a cookbook. Um, but it might also say Caslon Big, Caslon Bold, Caslon Display. Those are great for headers. So just reading the little bits of how each weight and style in a family is named can help you also determine what it should be used for. So what we see here is typographic scale. We see a serif letter A from 6 point all the way up to 72. Below, we also see what happens to typefaces when they get small inside of a screen-based environment, right? They get really heavily pixelated. Um, and so when type is small and screen-based, a sans serif helps maintain legibility better than a serif typeface. If you see a website with body copy, and that body copy is a serif typeface, you are looking at uh, a design created by somebody who's not an expert, who doesn't fully understand the correct application for serif and sans serif typefaces, specifically within screen-based environments. If you do a little Google search, you will find that the original Google logo was a serif typeface. Um, and as the company grew and more experts were folded in and their design language became more mature, they understood that they needed to update their logo with a sans serif typeface, which is a more appropriate letter form for a screen-based environment. To the right, you will see something that you've probably seen many, many times, going to an eye doctor, right, and reading the eye exam chart. And from a distance, some letter forms are better readable than others, right? It's small sizes. So if you were setting a headline for a billboard, you probably wouldn't use 10-point type for something that somebody has to read from 40 feet away, right? We would go larger according to the distance that the viewer is from the piece of design. So scale and density. Scale is how big it is. Dense is how many letters are going to be in the composition. Purpose. So all typefaces are designed with a specific purpose in mind. Some are meant to be decorative, while others are intended to maximize legibility. There are typefaces designed specifically for newsprint, paper, and others that are symbol-based. If you're unsure how a typeface should be used, look for a type specimen on the original Foundry's website for guidance. You can also search for the font on fonts in use. Adobe fonts, so fonts.adobe.com, which you can browse even without a subscription. Every typeface that is in there typically has a really good type sample that starts to give you clues for how the typeface should be used. So I've included two vintage typeface promo documents in this lecture. So back in the Daysicle, when you released a typeface, it was digital, or it was metal pieces, or it was photographic glass lenses, right, with the letter forms on them. And even in like the early days of digital font releases, you still had to buy a physical object to get the digital fonts onto your computer. We were not downloading things from the internet. So you might have a, print magazine that has a advertisement for the Fruitiger typeface, or the Univer typeface, and at the bottom, it has like a little note for like how much money to send to the company to get a copy of the typeface. So in the early days of digital distribution, you would mail in a check and they would mail you back a floppy disk. And you would put that big floppy disk in your computer and load the fonts on and begin using them. So printed promos were really, really important. So when you look at fonts.adobe.com and you see all those typefaces, and you see the examples of fonts in use, think back on these two images, a time where you actually had to make a printed advertisement for that thing, and run samples of it in publications. So at the top left, what we see is a Univer typeface promo. And this promo alludes to the periodic table of elements to show just how flexible this typeface is. So on the vertical scale, we see ultra to light and ultra to black, so affecting the weight of the typeface. And then on the horizontal scale, we see width. So all the way to the right, to the top, it's going to be the lightest weight, most condensed. And all the way to the bottom left of the scale, it's going to be the heaviest weight, the most stretched out. So this is a ad showing the flexibility of the Universe typeface. And then on the bottom right, we see Zap Dingbats. So this was a symbol-based typeface. I mean, every time I see this thing, I think about how underlooked and underappreciated Zingbat or the Zap Dingbats are as a typeface. This layout is beautiful. I think we super take for granted what we could actually do with these things. I love this print ad. So selection factors. Here's another example of a typeface designed for a very specific reason. FF Chartwell is a typeface that is designed with open type features, that allow the designer to build infographics. So this typeface is so unique that it comes with a user's manual teaching you how to access the open type features and how to use it. But for example, in step one, you could type in your values. So 10 plus 30 plus 60, you would highlight that text, open your open text features, and select pie chart. And it would automatically convert the type that you had typed in manually into a pie chart. Um, so this produces all sorts of infographics and data visualizations. And then the Chartwell typeface itself, the A to Z part that is not a chart, complements the graphics that it produces. So this was really, really useful for people creating things like annual reports, scientific papers or documents, financial reports. It was released by Vectrotype. You can take a look at this stuff. Um, this is also, sorry, Chartwell is also, the folks who created this went on to start something called Future Fonts, which is a really great website where you can buy typefaces as they're in process. So it's sort of like being a ground level investor. And you will have access to updates of that typeface as things get tweaked or perfected. Production method. So here's an example of how production method should be considered when we're choosing a typeface. So different production methods can alter the appearance of type. Some typefaces are specifically designed with these situations in mind, but it's largely up to you as the designer to make the decision. For example, a thin, very, very thin stroke on a serif can disappear on a computer screen if it is less than 1 pixel, right? It can get, we saw those little pixelated lines, so it can get mushy or blurry if it's a thin stroke. So I'm thinking again back to Dido, which is the Vogue typeface, right? Where we have these very thin lines, very thick lines. Those thin lines can really be compromised at small scale on a screen. Um, Whereas some paper types, like think about newsprint. So back in the day, we had these things called phone books. They were about this thick, and it was filled with every phone number in your region. The phone company would leave them on your doorstep. And if you needed, we didn't have Yelp, we didn't have anything like that. So if you needed a service, right, you needed a plumber, you would go to the yellow pages, you would flip through, you would find a plumber, and you would give them a call. But these books, because they're so thick, the paper was really, really thin, and the grain on the paper was really, really loose, which meant when ink touched the paper, it sucked it up really fast. And so for some typefaces, um, as the ink soaked into the paper and spread out, it would compromise the integrity of the form of the letter. And so Bell Centennial was designed for the Bell phone book. You guys might recognize some of these like ink trapping things um, in brands like Actual Source, right? Like the Actual Source website, their typeface uses a typeface that has ink traps in it, these little notches. These are called ink traps. And they were designed for, um, you know, low density, high absorbent paper where the ink would spread out. So you can see here, here's Bell Centennial, the letter M with these little ink traps. And you can see that when the letter is printed onto this paper and the ink spreads out, it still maintains these sharp counter areas with the letter form as the ink fills in those traps. The other note about this is that it's pretty cheeky, little bit ironic to use these on the web, right? Because the ink traps were never meant to actually be visible. They were meant to be functional and disappear when you printed them. Historical context is important. So understanding when a typeface was created, its historical usage, that can also influence your type choices. So a newer sans serif may be inappropriate for some contexts, while older serifs might not fit others. So even two similar sans serif typefaces can convey different meanings consciously or unconsciously based on their origins. So, for example, Accidents Grotesque inspired both Helvetica and Franklin Gothic. If you were designing a book about American modernism, which one of these fonts might you choose? It would be helpful to know that while Helvetica and Franklin Gothic are both inspired by Accidents Grotesque, which came from Germany, that Helvetica is the Swiss version and Franklin Gothic is the American version of this interpretation. So you might recognize the Swiss version as aligning itself with brands like IKEA, where it makes sense. So if you are making a book about American modernism, you might avoid Helvetica because it is so famously known as a super Swiss typeface, and that Accidents Grotesque is known as a super modern German typeface, and opt for Franklin Gothic, the American version of a modern typeface. So to learn more on your own, to keep growing beyond this class, beyond these lectures, um, I recommend type electives, which I learned about through Juan Villanueva, who teaches these classes, organizes these things with other really brilliant educators. I recommend Skillshare. I've sorted this out by type classes, so you can click on that. Also, Type at Cooper is another option for learning about type and typography, designing typefaces. Um, these three resources are outside of a traditional university setting and are things that you can do on your own. So let's get into the semiotics. So over time, a typeface can accumulate a symbolic or semiotic meaning based on how it was used. For example, the black letter style of calligraphic script has gained multiple layers of meaning through its historical use and in different contexts. It can evoke various histories through which it has been carried and connected. So, the first thing we're going to look at here is the fracture typeface. Um, this is a German black letter typeface, uh, pretty innocuous at the time of its making. But because it was later adopted by Hitler and the Nazis in their branding and for the cover of his book, this style of type, fracture and black letter type, quickly became semiotically connected with ideas of fascism, Nazism, being oppressive, supremacy. The typeface was so heavily connected to the Nazi Party through its branding that people avoided it completely after World War II. Um, we also see black letters show up in black letter style. So this is not fracture. Um, Headlines for newspapers. So a masthead for a newspaper would be set in black letter type. And because it symbolizes importance, because it symbolizes history, it was also adopted subculturally in like Chicano tattoos. Um, Mexican American people using black letter to identify neighborhoods that they were affiliated with, gangs that they were affiliated, the names of loved ones, their family last names. And because these were heavily associated with prison tattoos and criminality, um, this black letter type was banned by LAUSD in any school projects, which included school newspapers for LAUSD. So, as part of its dress code and dress attire, black letter typefaces, calligraphic typefaces were banned from clothing, from being visible on students' bodies, and was also banned from being used in school projects, including newspapers. Um, we see a few examples of black letter being reclaimed, in some ways successfully and some ways not successfully. So this is Cali DeWitt, a line of merch created for Kanye West, um, for the Pablo tour. These shirts call back to, again, Chicano culture, um, be like LA, Arizona, Texas, sort of like bordering cultures. And this is a shirt that is traditionally known as like a memorial, right? So if somebody passed, you would make like a memorial t-shirt or a memorial graphic of their name, birth, and death date, which is why, the shape of the letter form follows an arc or a tombstone shape or a portal shape. And Callie Thornhill DeWitt was able to reclaim this visual language and use it in a really specific way that allowed it to escape being associated with ideas of, Hitler, Nazi Germany. Unfortunately, Kanye could not let that one slip and had to go back and clarify, RIP Kanye West. Um, but the time that this merch came out, I thought this was a really successful approach to bringing black letter back, but without like a heavy oppressive overtone. And I think that the color has a lot to do with that. It has bright neon colors. Um, the way that the type is open, right? So the space that exists between letter forms lets it feel a little bit lighter. So just making a couple of choices, design choices, helped relieve this type of coming across really oppressive, as opposed to this unsuccessful version of using black letter type. So this was a product line made by Tom Hanks's son, and he was responding to the Black Girl Summer trend, by trying to be cheeky and say white boy summer. But once you start using the words white and boy and use white letters in black letter type on a black shirt, photographed on a person with a very closely shaved head, we are suddenly reading skinhead, right? It's suddenly reading very racist. Um, so semiotic is really understanding semiotics is really important when setting type. He claims that this was never his intention, and that he was just trying to be funny and counter the Black Girl Summer quote that was going around. Um, but obviously is not a designer who understands semiotics. Um, I don't think a designer who understands semiotics ever would have let this fly. Tuscan style type is another great example. So Tuscan style typefaces originated in the early 19th century, primarily in England and the United States during the Victorian era. These are wood cut typefaces that were designed to be like really big on big broadsides and big posters. Um, and their fancy design was to compete with other typefaces on a street with lots of advertising to stand out as unique. Tuscany is a place in Italy, right? So the naming of the genre of typeface is Tuscan, was originally supposed to be like a nod back to Italy and Tuscany. Um, but I'll bet none of you guys thought about Italy or Tuscany when you looked at this typeface, right? So they became popular with the rise of industrial printing, mass communication, um, because of their elaborate and eye-catching style stood out in busy environments. But what does this make you look at or think of when you look at it? Yes, it makes you think about wanted posters, Hollywood Western movies. So Tuscan fonts became associated with Western movies largely due to their extensive use in the 19th century American frontier and Wild West. The visual culture of that time, such as posters and saloon signs and advertisements. And so when filmmakers in the 20th century began making Western movies, they really sought to evoke an authentic visual aesthetic of the Old West by using these typefaces. Um, so when we see Tuscan typefaces, we really think about this. So the evolving cultural context of typefaces. These are chop suey fonts. These fonts are rooted in 19th century something called Orientalism, very problematic. And they were designed without any authentic ties to Asian culture or calligraphy. These are typefaces that became a shorthand for Asian identity, but specifically toward a non-Asian audience. Um, so they started to perpetuate racial stereotypes. And despite some early Chinese immigrants adopting these fonts for commercial appeal, right, to communicate to a non-Chinese American audience that they were a Chinese restaurant, they would choose these typefaces as a semiotic, saying, hey, this is Chinese or this is Asian. Um, their current cultural landscape, the current cultural landscape is increasingly critical of their use, because they're mostly used by non-Asian designers and they're historically associated with really harmful stereotypes. And these stereotypes that are perpetuated with these, they're not that old, right? Like this is a World War II era poster that is extremely racist, perpetuating extremely racist Asian stereotypes along with a chop suey font. And you would think that maybe this was like peak inappropriateness of this whole visual language, but then we have this t-shirt from Abercrombie and Finch, right? So Abercrombie and Fitch, not a fan. Um, so the problematic perpetuation of racial stereotypes via chop suey fonts persists. And this makes us critical of them now. So there are some things that you can look at here that help us think about what is the context of a typeface. Um, this is a article that you can click through called Karate Wonton Chow Fun, The End of Chop Suey Fonts, which debates whether or not a typeface can be racist. And then there's a type room counter opinion that says, no, a font cannot be racist. Um, This provides two sides of an argument. I will tell you where I fall. Um, is this typeface itself, its mark and its existence on my computer, racist? Does it go around calling people racist names and assuming things and oppressing people? No, it doesn't. It's not a person, it's not embodied. But the people who use them are perpetuating racist ideas. And so I would think of this typeface as sort of a bucket that carries racist single-storied, narrow views of what cultures are. And it's not just chow fun typefaces. There are lots of typefaces that can do things like this. And so I think it's always best, especially if you want to represent a culture, to look at how that culture represents itself in a contemporary place. This is a really beautiful example of typefaces designed for a campaign during COVID in San Francisco's Chinatown with letter forms that are actually inspired by the actual kanji writing and the brushstrokes that exist there. So basically using these markings um, as a template for developing Roman letter form and providing messages that are in both Chinese and English and refer to culture without being racist. So there are ways to do this better. And finally, our monster of type, Ellen Lupton. I love her. She comes with a very specific and I think much needed feminine perspective on design education. Most of the type bros I know hate her or are critical of her. And I really think that that reveals a lot of latent sexism within that still exists within this culture, which was historically male dominated. Um, so Ellen Lupton to me is like the Miss Lippy kindergarten, Miss Rachel, super friendly, super approachable, super generous design educator. She is a prominent American graphic designer, writer, curator, and educator. She's widely known for her work in typography, design theory, and education. Some of her most famous works include the book Thinking with Type, which was just revised and expanded and is available in our classroom in Mentry 205 for you guys to check out. Um, she also wrote the book Graphic Design, The New Basics, and Design is Storytelling. So these books, I think, are essential reading for designers as they explore fundamental principles of graphic design and typography in clear and accessible ways. She has a fantastic social media presence where she teaches you about typography in like these really great, like 90-second, 60-second snippets. Um, Her work often emphasizes the power of design as a tool for communication and storytelling. She focuses on how designers can use typography and visual elements to create meaning and engage audiences. I hope that you go find her work, give her a shot, be open to her, listen to what she has to share. Not all of us learn the same way or through the same lens, and I really appreciate her teaching style. I hope you guys appreciated this lecture. Thank you for choosing me to be your professor and to learn with me, and I look forward to keep working with you in the coming weeks.